Hey everybody, welcome, and thanks so much for watching here at the Brices Crossroads battlefield. This is not the first video at Brices Crossroads. If you haven't seen the other ones, go back and watch those because we're going to tie up the battle here, talk about some preservation, and show you some other cool things. I'm Gary Edelman, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. That's Chris White behind the camera. And you might recall from our last video that up that road in the distance, at what is the high ground in the distance, the high ground, that is sort of where Brices Crossroads is, where Nathan Bedford Forrest hit the Union center and began to envelop and push back that Union force. And where did they come? Right back here along the banks of Tishomingo Creek. Tishomingo is a word you hear a lot around these parts. I won't say it with the right accent though, but you may have heard us talk about it on one of our Corinth videos, the Tishomingo Hotel and otherwise. You see that a lot around here. Well, Tishomingo Creek is right behind the camera over here, and we're going to talk about what the Union's trying to do, a superior Union force that is absolutely getting pushed back and beaten by a smaller Confederate force. To start talking about that, Chris Mackowski, Emerging Civil War, has probably written 40 books about this battle.
And it's so cool to be out here on the field. As you notice, as Gary pointed out, off in the distance is where the core of the fighting was. Sam Sturgis comes onto the battlefield just in time to really start getting pushed off the battlefield. And so as a result, his men are going to have to basically backtrack in the same direction they came onto the battlefield. I'll have Chris kind of turn off in this direction because the Federals had come to the battlefield from the north, from the northwest, down this road you see behind me, tried to make their stand up there at the intersection, and then as Forrest puts pressure on the center and starts getting on the sides, it forces Sturgis to come back here onto this hillside. In this hilltop, he's got Tishomingo Creek to his rear, and things are now starting to look a little desperate because now this is where Forrest, who's outnumbered by more than 2 to 1, is pushing in on the flanks, and it really becomes a tight spot for Sturgis, who can't hold on to this field. And with Forrest just hammering, it's really going to cause some problems. And one of the really cool things that happens as part of some of those charges is some real innovative battlefield stuff, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, because there was a great phrase that Don used. We're going to bring Don back in here in just a second and talk about the idea that the Blitzkrieg began here at Brices Crossroad. Gary?
He couldn't resist saying it. He just
Too
gave
good.
away the story there. Thank you so much, Chris. And let's bring back Don Barrett. He's a member of the Board of Trustees, and man, he is all Mississippi. So Don, some of the troops get up here, right? The Union troops are fleeing. Forrest is pursuing. Is Forrest surprised here? And what's he trying to do here?
No, he wasn't surprised at all. He knew that if he could beat the Yankee cavalry here, that he could fight the cavalry man to man, even odds, and he could whip them in a couple of hours. He knew that the Federal infantry would be behind a couple of hours. They would be sent to come double quick, and it's 100 degrees in June of 1864, 101, and they had heavy wool uniforms on. They would get here and they would be exhausted. That's exactly what happened. Forrest was correct. Forrest, as he launched his last attack, he told his captain of artillery, Captain Morton, said, bring your guns and put them in the line. It's the beginning of Blitzkrieg. Put them in the line. When the men go, you go with them. He said, General, they'll capture my pieces. He said, son, artillery is made to be captured. Now get on up in there. And he did, and they weren't captured. Could I say one other thing about the geography here? I'm pointing to the northwest. The northwest that's Memphis. It's all the way downhill from here to Memphis. It's uphill all the way here. The reason we know that for a fact is it took Sturgis and the Yankee Army 11 days to march here, but they were able to get back in a day and a half. Of course, they didn't have any guns. They didn't have any backpacks. They had no wagon trains anymore, and they also left their artillery so they could get back a little faster.
So that's a great thing to tie it up, and it reminds me of the Battle of Manassas or the Battle of Bull Run, where McDowell took, 4 days to get his force out to Centerville, and then took about 12 hours to get him back to Washington, right? And that is a good point. So things aren't going to go well for the Union here, and it's painful for me. I mean, these are mostly Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and Ohio troops. I'm a Midwest guy, and it's painful, but they are in full-on retreat. It could have been Sturgis's whole force, but there is going to be a good rearguard action. That's not going to prevent Forrest from capturing, all of Sturgis's artillery, basically, 1,500 small arms, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, all of his wagons, everything, like Don just said. So let's talk about that action. Chris, you think you're good enough on that? We didn't work this out in advance.
It's a little bit like Commissary Banks, except it's Commissary Sturgis here. When Don said that artillery was made to get captured, quoting Forrest, well, in fact, that's true. The Federals lose all of their artillery here, 16 pieces that are going to fall into Confederate hands. They're going to lose about 2,000 captives who are going to then get taken. Now, if you think that there are about 8,500 Federals here, 2,000 of them get captured, that's a pretty substantial portion of your force. So I think that's also one reason why they're able to get back to safety a little quicker too. Now, as part of this whole retreat that starts to turn into a rout, there's a key element to the Union Army that's really going to save this from being a complete disaster. Guarding the wagons train off to our rear, to the northwest of here, are some United States colored troops. At this point in the war, early 1864 or June 1864, I'm still not sure what to do with colored troops, and so it's a bit of a political hot potato. So they're in the rear guarding the wagon trains, just as they are off in the east in a lot of instances. And so it then suddenly falls to these troops who are not at the front, not expecting to come into combat, suddenly finds combat coming to them. And they're going to play a key role in keeping this retreat from turning into a rout. And they're going to have a substantial role in holding back Forrest's men as they try to pummel the rear of Sturgis's force. And the USCT is going to hold tight and hold that position and prevent annihilation. Gary, let me have you come back in here because I know that the USCT story is really important to something that the Trust is working on right now.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I mean, we're talking about 1,200 USCT, and they are in the right place at the right time, and that force and their commanders, this is why any of Sturgis escaped with only 40% loss or something like that, and of which 60% were captured at that point. So the USCTs, 55th, 57th, I think off the top of my head, are fighting tough there, and we were really happy to be able to secure that land. Now let me zoom out for a second before I bring Don back on here. We have preserved the Trust, its partners, and we can't do this alone, 1,500 acres plus. It is most of all of the Brices Crossroads battlefield. Everything you've just seen in your field of vision there, all the way to the crossroads and beyond all points of the crossroads as well. Just a few more properties left to get, and this is one of the most recent, but I want to back up a little bit because this started because local citizens, this is how this works. Good friend of ours and a former trustee named John Haynes, as well as some others, got together with the county, with the local bank, with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and started to find some money from a new group, the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites, and something called the Civil War Trust, which later merged to form who we are today. The former actually had $100,000 from the Disney deal that you might be familiar with as well, and that's where it started. 100 acres here, 100 acres there, 10 acres here and there, and it continues to this day, and a lot of the preservation here, including the key tract that the USCT saved, is really happening because of our friend over here, Don Barrett, and some of his partners. So Don, what do you have to say about all this?
Well, I'm so proud that we were a part of the preservation of and you can call it a victory. I mean, they held that line for 45 minutes. You have to picture the U.S. colored troops were there on that ridge. They formed up while the Caucasian troops had totally panicked and were throwing their guns down, and very calmly, with a lot of guts, a lot of fortitude, they went into line and they stopped the Confederates cold. And it allowed, not a victory, but it allowed hundreds and hundreds of those defeated troops that had been in battle to escape. And then they retreated in an orderly way, and it stopped the capture and the annihilation of Sturgis's whole army. And you just can't say too much about that. One final thing, this is the most important site for U.S. colored troops that's been preserved in the United States, and I'm so proud that it's in Mississippi. And they have, in nowhere else in any battlefield did the U.S. colored troops have the opportunity to exhibit their courage and their fortitude and their ability as fighting men as they did here. And so we're proud that it's here. We're proud that the American Battlefield Trust has preserved it.
And I was just going to jump in real quick on that because it really does open up significant opportunities for USCT troops here in the West, just as at Spotsylvania in May of '64, where they find themselves engaged by guarding a wagon train, and that starts to open people's minds up about what the USCT can really do and how to solve that political hot potato. Same thing happens here. This becomes a vital proving ground for the USCT here in the Western Theater, and opening up a lot of opportunity. I want to rewind to a second to something Gary had talked about with the terrain here, and as Chris has kind of shown you these rolling hills. Back in 1864, this was still a very sparsely populated part of Mississippi. It had been part of the Cherokee Nation just 30 years earlier, so settlers are just coming in. So this is a patchwork of small farms and lots of forest. There had been corn grown here, a little bit of cotton, and a lot of forest. And so being able to kind of see the terrain today, the way it's opened up now, is really a great and almost priceless opportunity to learn about this battlefield. But you can see why, with these rolling hills around me, and imagine that patchwork of forests and farms, why it's so hard for the Federals to mount any sort of secure defense in this position, because the topography is just working against them. And that's why battlefield preservation is so important, because you finally get to preserve the ground. You can see the topography for yourself.
Man, I had a big closing thing planned, but I think you've done it. You've already joined us at a lot of places. We've been to Fort Henry and Donelson. We've done Shiloh. We've done Corinth. And for this part of the war, you, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, and our partners have preserved some 4,400 acres at those places. And 1,500 of those, a third of them, are here at Brices Crossroads. So we want to thank you for all the work you've done. Chris was pulling up some of the maps earlier showing what we've done here, and you can just see that we're almost done here. And you were able to see, I hope, in the upper left, the USCT site that we were recently able to acquire with the help of all of our local partners here. So thanks, Don. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris behind the camera here. And thank you all so much for watching, for supporting battlefield preservation and education.